Hello, welcome to the show, Mr. Ego and the Feral Monk. Hope everyone's had a nice holiday break and are ready to talk about pranayama today. We've been discussing Patanjali's 8 limbs over the past this season, and we're up to episode 5, I believe. And pranayama is definitely one of the most important parts of Patanjali's eight-folded path, and I believe it translates to breath disciplined or breath undisciplined. And we've probably all at one time or another, practiced pranayama without even knowing it. Maybe when you get yourself in a situation where you're, hyperventilating or really stressed out, and you've been told to kind of just calm down and count to 10 and breathe in deeply, and so basically I think that's kind of what the function for pranayama can be. Of course the end goal is concentration. So Mr. Monk, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing okay. I'm feeling better now that I got over COVID. It wasn't that strong, but it was long and it was strange. It's affected my taste, and I still got a little bit of sinus trouble from it. But yeah, starting to feel a lot better again.
Oh man, that's great to hear. Yeah, I know a lot of people out there are experiencing the wrath of the COVID, and hope everyone's taking care of themselves. I'm glad that you were able to get better, and I know your son had it too. So
Yeah, but he's
glad.
he's a, he's a kid, so it was for him. It wasn't much, It was like
Mhm.
3 days, and then he was good to go. So
Yeah, my
power of
stepdaughter had
youth.
it last year, and yeah, she wasn't even phased by it hardly. But yeah, oh, it's good to have you back, and glad you're healthy.
Yeah,
So
thank you very much.
yeah, so let's delve into pranayama, and why don't you talk about, I guess the different methods of breathing, the yogic breath, and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I think maybe be a good idea to kind of start with in general. We've mentioned it before. We actually, in the first season of the podcast, we talked about breath once, and you demonstrated some box breathing, um, and we talked in
That's right.
general about how it would be nice to have a whole episode dedicated to the breath. So, and now we find ourselves here in the second season with exactly that topic before us. In those, I think also in this season, I've mentioned that pranayama is because it's a Sanskrit word. It's either intentionally double meaning or depending on how you want to split apart these compound words, you could take two different meanings out of it. Prana ayama being breath undisciplined, or pranayama being breath disciplined. Prana itself is something that, like in many spiritual philosophies and cultures, is also associated with the spirit or with life force. A lot of times, or at least in the Indian ascetic tradition, that reasoning is that you can go for months without food, you can even go days without water, but you can barely go minutes without breathing. So it seems to have some type of primacy or importance to human life. And the early ascetics, they sort of they did a lot of observation, being out in the woods, out in the forests, meditating and observing, and engaged in these ascetic practices. They observed well, they observed many things, but they observed, for example, that the pace or the speed of your breath directly sort of reflects your mind state. So when you tend to be stressed out, or you're in a flight or flight situation, or um, or maybe doing something extremely difficult, or you're relaxed, or you see a beautiful sunset or a moment of ecstasy. All of those things have different breaths that kind of correlate to them. Whenever you're stressed out, your breath's going to be a little more shallow and it's going to be faster. Whenever you relax deeply after a hard day's work, it tends to be a sigh. Whenever you get really tired, you yawn. Just like when you were talking about something that is, at least in Western culture, pretty familiar to all of us, is whenever you get really possessed by anger or rage, the advice is often, wait a second, take a few deep breaths before you act.
Yeah.
And so there's this intuitive observation that they had, that breath has this importance and it reflects our mind state. So they sort of went about it with the idea of, well, if my mind state shows up in how I'm breathing, maybe if I control my breathing, I can mirror that back into my mind state. So if I slow my breath down, maybe it will calm my mind down. And so there was a use of breath to directly influence mental states, to calm yourself down, or whatever else. It was used as an object of concentration, especially pre-tantric yoga. It was used as a tool of concentration because it's a universal tool. Everyone has to breathe. It doesn't belong to any religion. There's no such thing as a Christian breath or a Hindu breath or a Lakota breath. Everyone has to breathe. So it's a very appropriate object of concentration. And because it's a very universal thing, it's always happening right now, and you have to do it to live. So there's a great deal of utility in it itself. You were talking about earlier before we started that that it also interestingly has a foot in each world of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems.
And also right before we go into that, I'm also wanted to mention, you were mentioning that the ascetics would pay attention when they would go out in nature to the animals too, and notice that the animals that live the longest breathe the slowest normally.
Yeah.
And so
that was also an influence on them.
Yeah, and it was another thing that I guess pranayama, was an end goal, kind of, was to live longer.
That would be for the ascetics.
Extend one's life. Yeah.
Exactly. That would be for the ascetic thing, like we talked about with the yamas and the niyamas. There being certain that also comes more into the tantric development of yoga, but it where they sort of observe these ideas, or they have these ideas that, for example, like with the if you become perfect in speaking the truth, then what you say will manifest itself, and so on. If you become perfect in pranayama and you extend and slow down your breath enough, then you're going to enhance your life force, and that's going to extend the length of your life. And so it was also, in a way, a little bit viewed sort of like almost like a power, a siddha, almost like an ability, a perfection, that you could gain the power of. The idea originally was that if you really perfected it, you could live forever, which is, that's just them extrapolating out on their idea to its farthest extent. Whether that's so or not, and I don't think anyone's managed it until now. But
but it's fascinating.
But it's a fascinating idea.
And it's fascinating how accurate they were, and intuitive without technology and science. Because now, like you were alluding to earlier, breathing, we know activates, your parasympathetic, portion of the brain, and kind of relaxes the sympathetic part of your brain, which causes you to have that fight or flight response. And definitely. So you can manipulate it to calm yourself down, to get through stressful situations in all instances.
And they also noticed that, like, we would say tapping into the parasympathetic nervous system, but what they noticed was, not only did my slow breathing calmed my mind down, but it gave me control over my heartbeat,
Mm-hmm.
gave me control over other unconscious, that's what the parasympathetic is, unconscious responses, biological responses in the body. And so something that, like, in the 18 and 1900s, whenever the West was encountering these yoga for the first time, like Vivekananda and these sort of early yogis, they were encountering people who were demonstrating in front of doctors and scientists the ability to control, to speed up and slow down their heartbeats,
Mm-hmm.
which was fascinating for them, even to the point of making it so slow that it appeared to stop, you know. And so there's definitely but that, again, that would have happened through this feedback loop of observation. Like, okay, my breathing is fast when I'm agitated. Let me slow my breath down. Oh, that's slowing my mind down. Wait a second, it's slowing my heartbeat down. Oh, maybe I can also like affect these other things inside of me that normally I wouldn't have access to. And then, as we've mentioned before, Wim Hof, sort of the one of the sort of modern
Mm-hmm.
yogis. Like, he's not really a yogi, but you could call him a yogi, and I think he got a lot of his ideas from those old texts. Took that also to the scientists, and to the point of injecting endotoxins into the blood, and then his body able to fight them off without ever becoming sick. And just absolutely amazing feats. Being able to
Mm-hmm.
spend hours submerged in ice, because of his heavily oxygenated body, and his body's ability to adapt to that stress over time, and not only shunt the blood away from the extremities to the vital organs themselves, but also be able to shunt them into the middle of even the extremities, so that the blood still is actually in the hands. You're not getting, the blood flow lost from the hands. So that's why he's not getting frostbite and things. So it was very, very interesting, and all of those things are through this phenomenon of the breath. And so pranayama, they Patanjali and all of these different teachers, they have different ways of kind of looking at it. Pranayama in Patanjali's sense was basically three modes: the inhalation, the exhalation, and the retention. And then how you vary those, it depends on how precise you are, how rhythmic you are, the duration of it, um, according to your ability, the capacity of your lungs, and your ability to concentrate and keep the rhythm going without wandering off somewhere, in your thoughts, and then missing that rhythm. Um, in the more Buddhist traditions, it was left alone. It wasn't necessarily regulated, because their whole goal was to try to see the world for as it is. So for them, it didn't make sense to interfere with the course of the breath, but to use it as a means of concentration, but also as a means to, once it's allowed to just flow on its own, then all of those mental states, because they're not being regulated, you're not consciously calming down your mental states. All of those mental theaters are being almost stoked, or I don't know what you'd say, caused or inspired by that. And so that
Instigated,
that that
kind
yeah,
of, yeah.
instigated. So you would have that unfolding mental theater in front of your mind's eye to observe. And so that would help you to see the world as it is, as it pertains to your state of consciousness right now in this moment. And can you gain insight off of that? Whenever you're watching these theaters going, do you see the mind's tendency to flee pain and run to pleasure, um, and all of these things? So they used it more of that in that sense. Patanjali also talks about unregulated breath. Um, Whenever it gets further along into his conversations about dharana and dhyana, so concentration and meditation. You have seated samadhi and unseated samadhi, and you have things that we'll talk about in coming episodes. But almost all of the things that yogic, whether tantric or traditional or Vaishnava or whatever the tradition is, pranayama is a very important centerpiece of practice.
Right. And basically, Patanjali, kind of broke it down into like the three. You've got the the inhalation, the retention, and the exhalation. And then the fourth one, which was kind of introducing, internal, external objects into the equation.
Mm.
But, and then I don't know if you mentioned it. What was it? How's it pronounced? Subaka?
Kumbhaka is the
Kumbhaka.
retention.
The
Yeah, it's
retention.
the retention.
Okay.
Yeah, I think for the modern practitioner, to keep things simple so that you're actually doing something.
Yeah.
Like we have this there's this tendency that whenever we dive down an intellectual rabbit hole to find knowledge about something, that we tend to lose the practicality of it. And so in order not to lose that eye on the practicality and the just the incredible tool that it is available for us, I tend to think of it more of, you have either longer inhalations or longer exhalations or retentions, and then a fourth one where it's even, where all of it is even completely through. And so you can imagine what those effects might be on your consciousness. If you're having a long inhalation, you're going to oxygenate your body incredibly well. Also, if you're doing the diaphragmatic breathing, where you're just basically pulling air in, you're gonna oxygenate, your body, and that in and of itself is going to be a huge benefit to your body. I mean, we all know, or maybe we don't all know, but in sports, it's well known that the sugar in your muscles is used up within the first few minutes. So if you're going on a long run, or you're doing anything that has to do with endurance, you're running on oxygen after a certain point. And so the ability of oxygen to literally sustain muscular activity for such long periods of time, whereas carbohydrate and fat can't do that, already speaks volumes about the power of oxygen. Yeah. So if you're breathing in longer, you're activating yourself. You're gonna have more of an awakening effect, and that's that natural intuition. Whenever you're tired, you yawn, you take a deep breath, and that's because the brain needs also a massive amount of oxygen to run. And so whenever you're getting too shallow in your breath and you start to get sleepy, and then your brain's like, hey, I need some more oxygen. This ain't gonna cut it. And so it takes over. That's where the parasympathetic takes over and says, no, we're breathing deep now. You're gonna yawn. And so that would be sort of the purpose of a longer inhalation. Longer exhalation, especially done really slowly, is how you're going to calm the mind down. You're going to calm your body down, and you're going to get a lot of carbon dioxide, or the waste matter that's expelled through the lungs. You're going to increase your ability to do that. So it's going to clean you out quite a bit too. Clean out those
toxins.
Yeah, clean out those toxins, and to get those lower lobes in your lungs that maybe during a normal course of breathing you wouldn't ever reach those deeper lobes.
Yeah.
And the even breath is going to pretty much make you even kill. It's going to be a very even, constant rhythm, and rhythmic entrainment of the mind is something that, with binaural beats and all of these different things, are something that is really prevalent today in like stress management. It's like in training the mind with the use of different rhythmic tools, whether it's musical or breath or anything else. Retentions is where you get into some of the magic, I would say, some of the more strange experiences of breath. Whenever you're highly oxygenated and then you start to increase the length of retention after the out breath, it puts the body almost into a deep silence, a deep calm that's related to the fight or flight, but it's more of like a deep acceptance of that. So it's going to stress some of the survival mechanisms, but it's doing it in a very interesting way. And that would be in the ascetic and the more tantric or the more esoteric forms of yoga. That's the jumping off point to leaving the body. So that's the jumping off point to astral travel. Usually it would be combined with Kichari Mudra, where you would plug the Amrit, the nectar, in the back, and then you would, out of that, exhale. Then there would, that's where the legends of these yogis who have, in caves, There's some interesting legends about certain monks meditating and getting that out breath out, leaving their body, but their body appears to be dead, but the hair and the fingernails still grow. Like really strange types of things where, okay, what is that? Is it real? Is it not real? That's a mystery. If you want
Yeah.
to go into it, like
Right.
then do the pranayama.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can read tons of stories about it, but if you're really interested in trying to see if you can get out of your body, then see if what they said was true or not.
Yeah, that's
Instead of just
accessible.
speculate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know what the purpose would be for it, but to each their own.
That's right.
You were mentioning earlier, you asked me about the full yogic breath.
Yes,
Um,
yes. Yeah, that's really fascinating to me. To start breathing down in your stomach, in your gut, your abdomen area, and then bring it up through your lungs, and then out your throat and nasal, and then going back in, you know, the same way,
yeah.
to kind of repeat that, to just, I guess, you were saying to prepare your body, to energize your body more.
Um, yeah, you would get that from the deep inhalation, but what it's more um, or what's more purposeful about that is just you're moving through all of the different you're recruiting all of the different muscles of breathing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
like
that's
you're
right.
you're starting off with the diaphragm, which is sort of like the syringe effect. It's like the vacuum effect. As your diaphragm contracts, it's pulling because of like the different balance of pressure. It's literally pulling the air into the lungs, but it has a limit of how much air it can pull in. And so once you hit that limit, then you start to recruit the other muscles around the neck, around sort of these deep shoulder muscles and things, and you would notice those muscles being activated whenever you fall into cold water, for example. You
Yeah.
dig now you're breathing all up here. You're not breathing with your diaphragm anymore. You're in like the survival mode.
Mm-hmm.
And so a full yogic breath, the ability to remain calm even though you're recruiting all of these muscles, is also subtly teaching your mind and your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems to be able to calmly move through survival states. So it can have a very good effect on the ability to remain calm under pressure and stress and situations that normally you would lose control. So, and at the same time oxygenating the body, and at the same time learning sort of the proper chronology of muscle recruitment in a breath. A lot of us tend to breathe very shallowly, just out of the chest, and so we've got lower lobes. It's pretty much like four lobes in the lungs, and the lower two lobes are very unused. But there's a vast amount of surface area that could absorb a lot of oxygen and get rid of a lot of carbon dioxide or other waste matters. And so it's just
Yeah.
a very complete training of the breath body, you could call it, and still getting the benefits of concentration and oxygenation at the
Yeah.
same time.
It's so underrated. People live their whole lives breathing the wrong way. Um, it's crazy. I think I did for a long, long time. I'm still trying to relearn how to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen the damage and effects that like chronic pulmonary disease and stuff I've had family members that suffer from that, and they've had to switch to like a CPAP device machine where they put on this thing at night, that gives them oxygen. um, and it's remarkable, that they're able to do that, and because like the effects are incredible on the brain, like the ability to concentrate and memory. It's all tied in with that, and if you're not getting enough oxygen in, it's not
Then
good.
none of your systems are working as well as they could.
It's like brain semi low grade brain damage
Yeah, absolutely.
that we're doing to ourselves.
Well, I mean, cells that if you starve cells of the basic nutrients they need to live, they die.
Yep,
So
makes sense. I
you
mean,
know,
yeah,
that's what's happening there. And it doesn't have to be from smoking or something like that. My dad has to use the CPAP, and he's never smoked in his entire life.
right,
You know,
yeah,
so
yeah,
and he was an athlete, so it's not that he also wasn't a deep breather whenever he was young, even though he might not have been completely consciously aware of it. He was still breathing deeply. So at some point, his breath became more shallow. I think probably a little more because of the weight that he gained after athletics, which is a typical thing for high level athletes. They get accustomed to a certain calorie intake, and then when the activity isn't there anymore, then that calorie intake habit is still the same, but the amount of calories they're burning as work
yeah.
reduces, and so it's
It's
natural
harder
that you
to
would gain weight. You
in
know?
injuries too. You
Yeah,
know,
and injuries,
your body starts breaking down, and it's harder to
and
recover.
he also has some allergies like asthma and these kinds of things too. So I mean, they're definitely extraneous influences on the situation.
Yeah,
Um, I do think it's interesting that people who tend to practice pranayama, or at least breathe consciously, maybe they don't call it pranayama. It is interesting that they tend not to have asthmatic problems and things as much. At least that's been my experience, and I don't want to say that that's empirical, but
yeah,
it's empirical in the sense that it's something that I've seen play out in front of me
yeah.
in observation. So,
First-hand verification. Yeah,
and so I would encourage everyone to take an explorative approach, to breathing. Just realize the magnificent tool that it is, the the way that it influences so many things like our mind state and the quality of our vital organs and how our cells are operating and functioning, and its ability to help us learn concentration um, whenever we leave it undisciplined, its ability to like reflect mental states for our observation so that we have the opportunity to see the mental games afoot inside of ourselves. um, yeah, it's just an incredible tool. And so I would say, take it more on the sense of those really four basic type of principles, where either practice and explore and see what happens, and different formulas, you know, of what happens when the in breath is longer, what happens when the out breath is longer, how do I feel whenever I even out all of my breaths, how comfortable am I with retentions, because retention isn't breathing in and then going like stressing to like hold it in. That's not the kind of retention you're doing. Sort of you're doing yourself a disservice by that. It's
right,
sort of, it's a
right.
calm pause
Mm-hmm.
after the inhalation. It's a calm pause after the exhalation. And so just playing with those four factors of breathing, um, can and watching and observing and experimenting with how that affects your body and mind will give you great insight into what it is without the need of a book, you know.
Yeah,
And other than that, I mean, you can then you can use, like
it
we
can
said,
help
as a
you.
universal object of concentration.
Yeah,
You
help you
can
get to
use the
sleep.
breath. Yeah, it can help you get to sleep, but also like in the sense of, if you need a large object, you can
Mm-hmm.
use the main chest cavity and stomach as it expands and contracts with the breath as your object of concentration. It's a little bit larger object, but it maybe is in the beginning a little more helpful. And
Yeah,
then you try to shrink the field of concentration down to where you, like the Buddhists, where you're getting, just the air as it passes
just the
by the
edge.
nostrils and the hairs, and it's a very small space. And
Yeah,
if you can develop that kind of concentration, and sustain it, a lot of really interesting things happen with the mind, and um, yeah, just very interesting side effects to that are worth exploring. They're not dangerous. They're worth exploring. The only thing dangerous about pranayama is, people who are just going to pick up a book or go to a yoga class, and they're doing some type of breath of fire or something like that, and they hyperventilate themselves and pass out, you know or instead of using because the breath of fire is the diaphragm, It's just pushing
That's
out air. You're
some
not taking in
Kriya
air.
stuff, right?
You're just pushing out air. And whenever you're pushing out air like that, then you're
Is that
not
Kundalini?
likely to high. Yeah, it's part of Kundalini. It's part of different tantric traditions. But it's you're just pushing the air out. You're not actually actively breathing in. And if you don't know that, then you get people who go in and they're doing, and that they're going to hyperventilate themselves and passing out because they're doing a very forceful thing. So you're going to have a higher chance of maybe breathing yourself to sort of a raw feeling inside of your lungs, sort of damaging feeling, almost like a chest cold. Or you hyperventilate, space yourself out, fall over and hit your head on something or whatever. So the only thing you need to be cautious with is your ignorance of what you're doing. That's what you need to be cautious with, whether it's asana or pranayama or anything else. The dangerous part of the exercise is you.
The ego.
Is the ego.
Check your ego at the door.
Yeah. Yes, please.
It's not a competition.
No, it's not at all. No one gets any prizes.
I think, speaking of, I think the Guinness Book of World Records for holding one's breath is held by some Swedish deep sea diver.
Okay,
Severance, and it's like 25 minutes almost.
Yeah, okay, I could imagine that. That's crazy.
I think someone might have broken his record by now. Yeah. But yeah, they did a Discovery Channel documentary on him a few years back.
Yeah. Yeah, there's
pretty wild.
Yeah, if you were gonna take any type of special pranayama to try to practice, I would suggest maybe Ujjayi. Ujjayi is done either through a throat lock. It's easiest to think about it instead of trying to think about tightening your throat muscles. The easiest way to think about it is having the air hitting the back of the nose. It's almost like a sonorous type of sound.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like if you were, even like a short breath, you can extend super long just by using that. I'll lean forward into the mic for it, but you can.
It's real soft. I can't hear
it. But you can go forever.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was audible or not, but you can literally take your breath and you can make it just go forever. You can take your out breath. It can be a short little shallow breath, but just by bouncing it off the backside of the nose, you can control how even it is, how smooth it is, and like that you can gain a lot of control over your breathing. And that's a breathing pranayama that's worth practicing. For your asanas, for whatever, just to gain control of your breath. I think the average person breathes, what it is, I want to say it's more than 16 breaths a minute. It's somewhere around there. Like the average person is breathing so shallow. Yep. And so the basic idea for a yogi would be let's get it down to 6. Make your breaths 10 seconds long at the least.
Yeah.
So if you use the 10-second model, then you can say, all right, I do 7 in and 3 out, for example, or 3 in and 7 out. You can play with those seconds, and then okay, I've been getting about 6 breaths a minute, so I've reduced, I've lengthened my breath and the ability for my lungs to do that exchange. I've enhanced all of that immensely, from 16 to 20 breaths down to 6 a minute, so that's also worth exploring for sure.
Definitely. Fascinating stuff. All right, I think this is a good stopping point for this one, and definitely check us out next week when we discuss dharana.
Yep. Concentration, dharana.
Which is definitely you gotta have some pranayama in order to do the dharana.
Yeah. Right? I think that's one of the great things about Patanjali. He's laying it out. one thing, then the next thing, like we were talking about, it can be stages. Um,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Or
but also you
petals.
can, yeah,
Yeah.
or petals, but at the same time, like we were talking about in the asana episode, you can still, you can take all 8 of those and incorporate them straight into asana, or you can
Yeah.
incorporate them all into pranayama, or you can incorporate them all into dharana. You know,
Yeah.
you can make them all one thing, but you can also see them as a series of stages.
Thanks again for joining me, Mr. Monk.
I appreciate you having me on. I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah. And hope everyone out there has enjoyed themselves. And Happy New Year to you. I guess we'll be seeing you next in 2022. So take care of yourselves. Love each other. Mr. Ego out.